On today's podcast, we sit down with Todd Mayo, the creative behind the internationally renowned music venue, the Caverns. Todd shares his deeply personal journey of overcoming adversity, transforming from an advertising executive to a pioneer in the music industry. He discusses his book, Caveman Chronicles, his passion for uniting people through music, and the inspirational story behind his iconic venue. We dive into the universal themes of resilience, fear, and discovery, along with the future plans for the Caverns that will leave you intrigued. Insiders, are you ready?
Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Rich Ezra and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we are thrilled to welcome the incredible Todd Mayo, author of the Caveman Chronicles and the visionary behind the Caverns, one of the most unique music venues in the world. Todd takes us through his journey of transformation and resilience, sharing heart-wrenching personal experiences such as the tragic loss of a childhood friend, his father's imprisonment, and overcoming adversity that has shaped his unwavering determination. We'll explore his remarkable transition from running an unsuccessful advertising agency to becoming a caregiver and eventually turning a mere cave into a world-renowned music destination. We also dive into his philosophies on risk-taking, resilience, and finding purpose, along with his insightful reflections on balancing dreams with practical action. Todd discusses the importance of embracing fear and challenges as pathways to personal discoveries and shares a unique analogy between commitment and a humbling life experience. You'll learn about the transformational power of music, Tennessee's rich musical heritage, and even some of his favorite inspirations like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. You won't want to miss Todd's inspiring story and profound insights. So stay tuned for an episode filled with wisdom, inspiration, and music business acumen. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Insiders! Are you an aspiring musician, artist, band, or future music business professional looking to take your career to the next level? Well, look no further. At MUBUTV, we offer personalized career counseling and coaching designed specifically for folks like you.
Imagine having both of us by your side, guiding you through every step of your music journey. Our sessions are tailored to meet your unique needs, focusing on critical aspects of your music career, such as refining your songs, defining your artist story, identifying your target audience, and enhancing your social media presence, just to name a few.
Whether you're just starting out or looking to elevate your existing career, we've got you covered. Our comprehensive approach ensures you get insights on everything from live shows to branding and marketing strategies. We understand that every artist is unique. That's why our coaching is personalized just for you.
And here's the best part. We offer flexible coaching packages that fit any budget. Choose from individual sessions ranging from 30 to 90 minutes or save with our discounted 4-session packages. Experience custom sessions designed to enhance your music career with opportunities for greater savings when you choose bundled sessions. Investing in your musical journey has never been more accessible.
Imagine the clarity and direction you'll gain after just one session. The feedback on your songs, the strategies to grow your audience, and the confidence to perform live, all tailored just for you.
So why wait? Don't let uncertainty hold you back. Join us for your free 15-minute discovery call at book.mubutv.com for a transformative coaching experience that will elevate your music career. That's book.mubutv.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is the one and only Todd Mayo. Now, you may ask, who is Todd Mayo? Todd Mayo runs one of the most unique and special live venues in the world. He runs the Caverns, which is literally a cave in Tennessee, which, as you're going to learn...
One of the most gorgeous venues.
Yeah. Oh my God, yes, absolutely. Not only one of the most gorgeous venues, but one of the most unique places. And as you will understand when you listen to the interview, it came to him in a dream. This was a very, very, very interesting conversation for many, many reasons. Primarily, this is a conversation about self-discovery and resilience, which are, two qualities that, I know Rick Rubin talks a lot about in terms of any artistic journey. Todd's journey from, he talks about personal loss and adversity to building, a very, very not only successful venue, but he also became a very successful entrepreneur as well. He wasn't somebody who was born into the music business. He didn't always have a job in the music business, but you'll learn, a lot of it came from a passion. It came from a vision. It came from a commitment. And mostly it came from, his self-discovery of what he's made of as a man and in terms of his own vision and overcoming a lot of obstacles.
Yeah, and staying with that theme, his sense of purpose, the fulfillment that comes from knowing that you're in the right place and doing what you're supposed to do is immense. It's a critical aspect of life. And I can't, this was a very inspiring story. Again, when we started to delve into the deep things that he had been through, because he's been through several very adversity, things throughout his life that anybody else would have just walked away from everything. And, he seemed to thrive on that. So it's just interesting how people can become so resilient and can rise after coming that much adversity.
Absolutely, Eric. And, it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because his entrepreneurial confidence came from, I guess, his own personal, transformations. He had experienced incredible loss.
Right.
He had not only on a personal level, but also on a professional level. And, when he speaks in the conversation about one of the things that gave him the final, I guess, how would you say it, strength and resilience to commit to this vision was the birth of his child.
Right.
And that, I thought, was an amazing element. He also speaks about, his marriage and fatherhood and, boosting his confidence and empowering his own entrepreneurial ventures. This is a man who had worked before I guess he had an advertising agency and had worked in that field. But so much of this came from, when he saw the cave and was in there for the first time, the vision that he had of what it could become.
Right.
And
had like an epiphany, yeah.
It's not only an epiphany, but also had the resilience and the commitment to see that through. It's like, like you're always saying, never, ever, ever give up.
Right.
But yet where do you find that strength? Where do you find that resilience? It's just, and often it takes years to do that. It takes years.
And you're going through a roller coaster ride, and it's just something that just happens that just perks you up, and it just, okay, this is going to get me to the next, to the next station.
Yes, to the next relay. Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the other things too that I thought was just, again, because it's a very spiritual story in terms of, how all these things came to be for him. And I think it was his first visit to a cave, was visiting a cave for the first time, which was, which was incredibly inspiring to him. It led to creating the Caverns in 2018. And, the concept originated from, his visit in 2008 to Cumberland Caverns in Tennessee, and that he immediately envisioned a musical venue in that unique environment. So, it's like he walked in there and he just immediately saw the whole picture, and that's how everything else opened up for him. So I just thought it was very unique and just very inspiring to hear his story.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where you realize that, there's an expression that says, if you want to know what someone's life is about, you just look at what they're committed to. It will tell you everything you need to know.
And with that, insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Todd Mayo.
Todd, welcome.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Eric. Glad to be here, guys.
We're really, really glad to have you. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and I know Eric is too. Yeah. You have such a fascinating story. And I want to begin with the question, do you remember when in your life that you knew that music was going to be your professional calling?
Wow. Music, there was a point in time when I knew, but it was after it had already began. So I love music. I'm not a musician, but I experience music viscerally and I feel it. And I've always loved music. There's always been a soundtrack to my life, back from being in my mother's station wagon as a kid, riding around listening to music in the 70s and listening to music in the 80s and getting my first record player and then tape cassette player and jam box and, right on through. But my background was advertising and marketing. And that's what I did up until the time that I was 36 years old. And in a very, providential or serendipitous way, I walked into a cave, guys. I'd never been in a cave in my life. And I laugh about it now and tell people I walked into a cave one man and I came out another. And that's true in the sense that I had no experience in the music business. It was just something that I enjoyed. I loved going to live shows. I loved listening to music, but I wasn't in the music business. And so I walked into a cave one day in 2008 on Memorial Day weekend and had this idea that this cave not only could be, but was, people just needed to know about it, a world famous music destination.
Great. It's a great segue to the next question. In your great book, The Caveman Chronicles, you describe your life as a hero's journey. And, how do you feel your own journey helped to shape and inspire the creation of the Caverns?
Well, I do. Upon reflection, and I wrote this book, The Caveman Chronicles, during the kind of the heart of the COVIDs. It was in the spring and summer of 2020. And of course, owning a music venue in a global pandemic was a challenging situation. But you need to kind of, pivot if you can. And it was an interesting time because I write in the book that I compare myself to my older brother, Denton. And he was born with a very nostalgic streak. So he's always looking backwards. And I think I wrote in there that all he ever wanted to be when he was 5 was 4 again, just for one more day. And he was just that way by nature. I've always been looking forward. I never spend a lot of time contemplating the past. And so during the pandemic, I thought about my journey and I thought about, wow, here I am. I'm living my dreams. If you would have said to the little 10-year-old Todd that, would watch on MTV and see U2 play at Red Rocks and, you'd have this music venue and you'd watch PBS Austin City Limits. And, when you were 10, 11 years old, 12 years old, and you would have this music venue that people would consider to be like Red Roxy destination music venue, and you'd be producing television on PBS and like an Austin City Limits show, and all these kind of things have happened. And you've done music productions in Cuba and Ireland and Australia, and on and on. And it's all kind of about to go away because of the pandemic. And that's really what it was like to be an independent, venue owner, an independent promoter, not a big corporation, not having deep pockets to withstand something like everything shutting down and canceling a whole year's worth of shows and refunding everybody's money. And so I said, man, I'm about to lose everything. And I've got my house tied to this and, personal guarantees and, banks, and I don't really own anything. The bank does. And so I said, well, I kind of laughed about it in a sense because there's nothing I could do about it. But it made me reflect upon my journey. And so to kind of, answer your question, when I started writing about my life and sort of comparing it to, there is a great mythologist named Joseph Campbell that wrote about the hero's journey, where across, all different cultures, through their histories, through their myths, through their religions, caves are metaphorically and literally like a place where people go to conquer their fears or to find a treasure. And of course, you can look at, Luke Skywalker goes into the cave, and the Star Wars, and Bilbo Baggins is in a cave, and Ali Baba and King Arthur in a cave, and, and religion and Buddhism and Hinduism. And so there's all this culturally across, generations and generations and all over the world, this sort of hero's journey. And one of the steps along the 12 heroes journey is journey to the inmost cave. And so I started looking at my life, and seeing how not only metaphorically did it really follow that kind of classic archetypal hero's journey, but literally it did. And so that's kind of part of the book is writing about that. And when we founded the Caverns, it really, really put a fine point on that we were kind of digging for buried treasure, but the buried treasure was a music venue, right? And so the process of doing that was something that was just really amazing, guys.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, we're going to talk more about that. I want to stay on this, the aspect of your own journey, because there's a part in the book, Todd, where you spoke of a profound moment that changed the course of your life. And you say in the book, confidence and will. I guess I was born with one, but had to build the other through years and years of doubt. Born with a strong will and bred with a fuck it mentality that was always just a step quicker than self-esteem. It was fatherhood that finally gave me the will, once and for all, to go for the kill in my quest, to put to rest, for the most part, the part of me that was always against me. And it was that concept of being against yourself that really struck me hard. What were the key moments or the struggles that made you realize this internal opposition, and how did you learn to overcome it? Because that's a profound one in people's lives that often can change the direction. So I really wanted to ask you about that.
Sure. Yeah. And that's, when I sat and contemplated my life in 2020, and I was at this place where I was like, for so many years, it felt like, things that were meant to be would just happen. And it kind of felt in some ways like it was all just laid out, like somebody was writing the book and it was all these challenges, and yet it would always we would overcome them in all these wonderful ways. And so I know what it's like to feel that great feeling in life, which is, to me, the best feeling you can really have is knowing that you're where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be doing with who you're supposed to be doing it with, right? Like we all love and thrive on that, like feeling a sense of purpose, like, man, this is like I'm living, people, it might be a cliche to say my best life or whatever, but like this is all flowing. And I contrasted that in the book with the reality of my life, which is, for much of it, I had the exact opposite feeling. And I used to think there was a dark cloud that was following me around. And so in the book, I write, about that journey. And yes, the book Caveman Chronicles is in many ways about an exterior journey of the cave and all these kind of things. But really, it's an inward journey, and you hit upon it. And it's a contemplation on finding your place in the world and understanding kind of how to get there. And there was a friend of mine that had read the book, Larry Nager, who's a bluegrass musician and author. And he said to me one time, "Todd, I thought you told me you had a great childhood." I said, "I did, Larry." "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I just read your book, and your best friend was run over by a school bus right in front of you when you were 5, and your dad went to jail when you were 10. Your parents got divorced when you were 11. You got kicked out of your mom's house, evicted from your dad's. In between, there's the FBI, jail, hurricanes, pirates." And I just laughed. Yeah, it was great. What's not great about all that? And not to be light about some things that weren't great, but it was certainly an interesting childhood. And so reflecting on things that sort of happened to me, and then reflecting on poor choices that I made through life, there's a moment in the book that really it all came together. And it was a specific day and time. It was January the 28th, 2001. And it's kind of like something like It's a Wonderful Life or Jimmy Stewart or something, it's kind of cliche, but I got down on my knees and was like, "Lord, anybody up there listening, I don't feel like I'm on the right path in my life. And I just feel like I'm going around in circles, and I really want to be on a path that's going somewhere. And I don't know what that is." And at the time, I had this advertising agency, and I was trying to get rich quick on this scheme. It was this thing called Body Shaper, Body Solutions. It was a snake oil thing where it was like, lose weight while you sleep, and I was doing radio advertising and helping this guy to get, filthy stinking rich by basically selling a bunch of, snake oil. And it was just, and I just knew that and there was a lot of different things that led up to that point. And so it wasn't like it was overnight, but within about 3 or 4 months, like my advertising agency failed, or really I just walked away from it. And there was various members of my family that were needing care. My grandmother, Mama, had Alzheimer's, and I moved in with her to help take care of her. And then my great uncle Freddie had Parkinson's and needed somebody to help him. And then my other grandmother I was helping out. And then there was another guy that was kind of like a brother to me, Matt Henrik, that my dad was helping to take care of. And so I kind of looked up at 29 years old, and I was a full-time caregiver. And it was interesting because it's just like life wasn't about me at that point. It was the first time in my life. I guess if you'd have asked me, in my 20s, I just thought that what life was like a process of like self, determination or self-actualization or, all these things about the journey of the self. And I don't know, the Buddha or whatever found enlightenment sitting under a tree or something. For me, it just kind of happened. I write in the book that I found enlightenment wiping another grown man's ass, which I had to do as a caregiver, which isn't fun. I think I wrote it's one of the most disgustingly intimate things you can do, but also one of the most selfless. And so, kind of the humbling part of like not sitting around thinking about me or my life or where I was going, just kind of being of service to other people, it changed me. It opened up my heart, and it really was a change event in my life. And so it wasn't until 7 years after that I walked into that cave, but my whole life just kind of changed. And once my heart was open, I got married, and then we had children. And so when I write in that chapter that you referenced, the eagle and the child, the eagle represents freedom, and the child was, of course, my son being born. And fatherhood was, and I write in the first chapter of that book about the moment that my son was born, and I had this sort of transcendent experience, and it was really crazy and spiritual. But what it really did was it changed me to the extent that I was like, I had the confidence now to put myself out there as an entrepreneur, because I just wanted to provide for my family, for my son. When it was just me, I was just, I told somebody the highlight of my 20s, if you would have asked me when I was 29, before that moment, what was the best thing that I'd done in 10 years, I probably would have said the time I took the New York Yankees in the PlayStation, 162 games and won the World Series, and Don Mattingly hit 400. And I would have meant that. I wouldn't have said that ironically. That probably would have been about my greatest accomplishment. And so it was just like having a son and all those things gave me the ability to put myself out there as an entrepreneur. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it all came together from a Cliff Notes version, and how it all came together internally for me to, become an entrepreneur.
Todd, there's another part of the book that we found particularly profound. You write about experiencing significant loss in your life from being, you kind of touched on this earlier, from being evicted from multiple homes to losing loved ones. This is a two-part question. How have these experiences, shaped your approach to risk-taking in your life, and how do you convey this resilience to others?
Okay. Well, I would say that some of those things, I guess, have informed me, like when you are evicted from different homes. And I write about in the book, that we started out in one cave and we kind of got evicted from that cave. So now all the negatives turn into positives. And so in my life, I think it's affected my ability to take risks, because I've lost everything plenty of times, or had to move from one place, or I literally had all my shit thrown out on the street when I was 17 and was evicted. And, there's been different ways where I guess that even though those are negative experiences, they I guess do foster a sort of resilience in the fact that you're not really scared of change. And I think that how that kind of informs or advice I would give to somebody as an entrepreneur. I sat there one time when all this was starting out with my wife, Jen, and we talked about it. And we said, well, what are we going to do if all this is successful? And we said, well, we'll move to the beach and sell Red Stripe on the beach. And it's like, well, what are we going to do if all this falls apart? Well, we'll move to the beach and sell Red Stripe. And so it's like, the way I try to look at it is, if your ultimate success plan and your ultimate failure plan are the same thing, then what do you have to lose? Right. And so I would always encourage people to, if they believe in something, and it's calculated risk. It's not, it's not manic risk, right? And I write in the book about some caregiving I've done for my uncle and my brother that are bipolar, and, kind of have some different, manic mania kind of type things. And, you can have ideas, and we all have ideas, and, it's kind of like head in the sky, feet on the ground. So if you don't have your head in the sky, if you're not daydreaming, if you're not dreaming, if you're not thinking, you're not going to have an idea in the first place. But if you're not tethered and grounded, you're never going to make an idea happen. And so the kind of untethered daydreaming Walter Mitty that's just, I was born that way. So my head's always kind of untethered from where I'm at, always thinking about different things. That just comes natural to me. What doesn't come natural to me is the grounding that it takes to actually take ideas and make them reality. And so I've spent and I spend most of my time surrounding myself with people that are as good of doers as I am a dreamer. And so that works out well for me. I do when I have to do, but I try to, have both of those things. So those have been real keys for me, is partnering and surrounding myself with people that sort of see the vision of what that I see, but, are better than I am at, being practical.
It's so interesting hearing you talk about this, and I've realized in this conversation, I want to go back a step and talk about the actual caverns themselves. Now, Todd, the caverns are renowned for a distinct and I guess what you'd call a spiritually charged atmosphere. You've written about the sense of, I think you called it dream time in the book, and the vision that you had when you were first touring the cave. Can you describe what that vision looked like in concrete terms, number one? And number two, I think our audience would really be interested in, how did you take that abstract idea, an underground cavern, and transform it into a fully functioning world-class venue?
Yeah, so I had never been in a cave before I went in to that cave. And so the Caverns now is, we opened up in 2018. First show was Billy Strings. Nobody knew who Billy Strings was in 2018, but the first show in the cave was 10 years before that. And that was the original cave. So there's been two caves, but what happened was I had never been in a cave in my life. And I walked into Cumberland Caverns in McMinnville, Tennessee on a tour, and immediately it was, and this has happened to me several times since, but this was the first time that it happened. And I didn't even write about that much of the other times in the book, but what it felt like was I walked in there, and the best way to describe it was, it wasn't a vision like, but it kind of was, because I got in there, and at the time I had been thinking about doing this show. I wanted to do like an old time radio show that had like, musicians, but also professional liars and storytellers, and kind of a vaudevillian kind of thing. It's an idea that actually came about in a different way called Music City Roots, that we did for about 8 or 9 years in Nashville in a barn. But I had this idea, so I was kind of maybe wanting to get into the music business or content business, and it was along, one of 50 ideas that were probably spinning in my head at the time. But I walked into this cave, and I was just like, oh wow! And it had this like chandelier hanging over this volcano room, and they had bathrooms, and I just saw it as a music venue. It was just obvious to me. Then I said to the tour guide, this girl, I said, do y'all have live music down here? And she goes, no, but that'd be a good idea. And so this is the kind of the crazy part looking back on it. I had no experience in the music business. This was late May of 2008. So take June, July, August 16th. So 10 weeks later, there was the first Bluegrass Underground. So in 10 weeks, did a deal with Cumberland Caverns, and then I went to WSM Radio, the home of the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, and I did a deal with them to have the show air on WSM right before the Grand Ole Opry every Saturday night. Where I would do shows in the cave, record it, post-produce it, and with interviews, and then have it air right before the Grand Ole Opry on Saturday nights. I found a sponsor, which was the Ascend Federal Credit Union, which that was my background, so that part was maybe the easiest. Took a band down there, the Volunteer String Band, and a sound engineer, tested the acoustics, booked a band. At the time, there was this band coming out called the Steel Drivers, and they're legendary now. And of course, their lead singer back then was Chris Stapleton. So the very first show we ever did was Chris Stapleton and the Steel Drivers down inside the cave. I put up a website. I sold tickets. I went all around everywhere, putting posters up, and this was 2008, and now I'm in the music business. And it all happened in 10 weeks from me walking inside that cave and having the idea to the very first show. And I had never done any of that before. And so it was quite remarkable how much serendipity was there. Having said that, kind of like I was speaking about head in the sky, feet on the ground, I did know, I knew how to do a deal with WSM. I knew that if I had WSM attached, that the artist would want to play it for the promotional value. I knew, so I had been in the radio business. And so I wasn't specifically in the music business, but I knew my way around, how radio worked. And so, my particular skill set was a lot of people might have come into that cave and had the idea to do that. Or I myself might have come into that cave and had the idea to do that 10 years before, and I wouldn't have been able to have done it. But when I walked in there at 36 years old, I knew this was something, and I knew that I could do it, and I knew what it took to do it. And so I saw the vision in a way that was like, this is going to be a world famous music destination. And I just knew it. I saw it. I could see people coming from all over the country. I could see it. And so I just set about to do it. And we just started doing one show after the other every month. And then I write in the book about, we started and I co-created a show called Music City Roots that we started, that was another live musical variety show that we did every week. And so all of a sudden, from, not being in the music business, within a year, I had 2 different shows going on, and very unique shows. And Music City Roots, I think I don't even know if I wrote this in the book, but it might just be a line that I've said since then. But we were live streaming when Netflix was still mailing people DVDs in the mail. And that's true. And if you go to, YouTube, you can see there's a billion views on Music City Roots on there, on video that we did and live shows we did, and 500,000 subscribers. And we haven't even done a show in 7 years. And Music City Roots was its own, musical adventure thing where I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But it all worked out because of the team of wonderful people that, I was surrounded with. And so, you never know what can happen when you go in a cave, man. That's what I tell people. So be careful. Things might really change in a profound way. They did for me.
Indeed. Todd, speaking of vision, you've described your career as a blend of high stakes risks and bold ventures, particularly with transforming the Caverns into an international music venue. I want to ask you, what gave you the confidence to pursue such an extraordinary vision? And were there moments when you doubted the project, or were you always fully committed?
So when I walked in had the first show in the cave, a guy came to interview me from NPR, the very first show back in August 16th, 2008. And we got to the end of the interview. He said, "What is your real vision for this?" And I said, "Well, as easy as this cave is on the ears, I grew up loving PBS and Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street, but Austin City Limits." I said, "I'd love to do a show like Austin City Limits from this cave." And he said, "Well, I'm actually a producer for PBS as well." And I said, "What was your name?" And he said, "Todd." And I said, "Man, I can remember that, dude." And so we formed a production company called Todd Squared. And so Todd Gerald is his name. Yada, yada, yada. We just taped season 13 of the Cavern Sessions that airs just like Austin City Limits all across the country. But to answer your point about commitment, Todd Gerald has a line. And when he said this line, he didn't invent it. He probably heard it somewhere too. But I said, my God, I'm going to use that one. But he said, Todd, it's like bacon and eggs. I said, how's that? He said, well, the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. And I said, oh, God, I love that. And so, Rich and Eric, I don't do anything unless I'm bacon. You know what I mean? I don't get involved in things. I'm only committed. And, I heard somebody say one time that 99% commitment is the same thing as 1% commitment. And I believe that. And so, all that to say was, I had a good situation going at the old cave. It wasn't ideal. I didn't own it. I didn't control it. We outgrew it. And, they didn't allow beer down there, alcohol. And so I didn't have any piece of the concession. So, it really didn't make any sense for me long term to stay at that cave. It was too small. And so it's not like caves grow on trees. Sorry to mix the metaphors, but, there are 11,000 caves in the state of Tennessee. But to find a cave that was ideal for what I wanted to do felt like a needle in a haystack until my right-hand man, who's the general manager of the Caverns, Joe Lurgio, heard about a cave from a caving friend in Grundy County, Tennessee. And we went and checked it out. And it was the first cave we ever even went to. And it's the one we are in now. And I knew when I walked in there, I had another vision. And the cave where the stage is now, you could touch the ceiling from the stage. So, the cave was only 2 or 3 feet high in some places, maybe 5 or 6 feet high in others. And I went in there, but I just saw it. And I said, oh my God, this is it. I can't believe it. It's almost like lightning struck twice, and it was amazing. And so, I acquired that land, which originally was 13 acres. And in the summer of 2017, we started building the Caverns. And in 9 months, the gestation period of the Caverns, we started digging it out. It was no dynamite or anything like that. We started off with little bitty excavators. And then as we dig out more, we could bring in a larger excavator. And it was just an amazing process to take this wild cave. And it was almost like an archaeological dig, because I really didn't know what was underneath all that dirt and rock. And so, people will often ask me, well, how do you turn a wild cave into a music venue, And I tell them it's a 3-beer story, but the gist of it is it took a lot of gist. And by that, I mean geologist, hydrologist, biologist, and archaeologist. And so we brought in geologists to come in and measure down and drill underneath the floor. Because if it was solid rock, we never would have been able to do it. But it wasn't. We went 20 something feet down, and I was like, okay, we can just dig this out. We had to bring in hydrologists because the cave itself, the Caverns, is a living wet cave. And when we get big rain events, it floods. So we had to put in a sump like you would do in your basement, and we pump the water out over to where it goes into the other side of the cave, which to bring in the biologist, that's where the Tennessee state amphibian, the big mouth salamander, lives. And we didn't want to upset their habitat. So we brought in Dr. Niedermeyer, and he came in and consulted with us on it. And then for the archaeologist, we live in Indian, Cherokee, and before that, the Woodland Indians. And we definitely didn't want to desecrate an Indian burial ground. I don't know. You guys are about my age, but, remember the Brady Bunch? Did y'all ever see the Brady Bunch?
Sure. Absolutely.
You remember what happened when they went to Hawaii and they desecrated that? It was bad on everybody. You know what I mean? So you don't need to be going around getting yourself into that kind of situation. So, I'm making a joke, but honestly, we obviously did not want to disturb if that was in fact the case. But the archaeologist came in and said, no, this is a wet, living, flooding cave. Nobody buried their dead in here. And so, there was a lot of bringing in 3-phase power, putting in the bathrooms, getting the septic, getting, obviously, the lighting, all the things that you need to do. We did them in 9 months. And from the first bit of dirt we moved out till opening night. And again, I look back on that and I'm just like, you can't pull a permit in Nashville or any big city to build an outhouse in your backyard in 9 months. And yet, we were able to transform a wild cave and the parking lot and, concessions and all the things that we needed to do. And so there's a real spirit of not just me, but Joe Lurgio and Temple Bowling. He was the general contractor on building the Caverns. And it's just kind of a bunch of dudes that at this point we kind of call it the Grundy spirit because we're in Grundy County, but it's just kind of that spirit of just make shit happen. Just do it. Let's quit talking about it and let's do it. Let's roll up our sleeves and let's build a cave. Let's build a music venue. And all that really served me well because during the pandemic, when we were shut down, we had some major pivoting to do.
Hey, insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured conversation. Stay tuned because we've got so much value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Eric, as an artist, what do you find are the most challenging aspects to a music career, especially when you're starting out?
Well, I think one of the first things is just trying to get the direction of who you are as an artist, where you want to go, where you want to be. And, we've talked about it on the show a lot. Who is your target audience? Who you are? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What do you think would resonate with an audience? And so those are some of the things that I would feel being a new artist. Obviously, what I know now is different because I know these things. But for people that are out there like our audience that don't have necessarily any direction to go, would be the first things that I would start off with.
And having the songs that
Absolutely.
incorporate those elements that you're speaking of into it. That's so important today.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we started MUBUTV and why we started this new consulting service that we're offering to all of our insiders out there, because that is another one of the big things. I mean, that is the big thing, is like having the great songs. That's what it really starts off. Our friend Don Grierson always said, it always starts with a great song. So that's probably, besides putting together what your audience and what your target audience is the single most important thing. Where are your songs at currently today? Are you collaborating with people? Are you trying to go out to networking events where you can connect with other songwriters and stuff like that? So
yeah, and what are your strengths?
Exactly.
You know, are you a strong lyric writer? Are you a strong melody writer? Are you a strong musician, a player?
Right.
You know, and it's really important to get really strong clarity on those issues before proceeding.
I totally agree, Rich. And, you know, with our consulting services, we offer a myriad of different packages and we've made it super affordable for everybody. So, you know, if you guys are interested out there in connecting with us on a coaching call, you can visit book.mubutv.com and start off with a free 15-minute discovery call.
Well, yeah, absolutely. There we start with an initial 15-minute call where we can get a sense of who you are, what are the issues that you specifically have, right, and want to work on.
Exactly.
And we can go from there. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we tailor everything to your needs. It's not like a cookie cutter thing. We kind of really want to get to know who you are as an artist, where you at today, what's the snapshot of you as an artist today, and then start trying to craft something that's tailor-made for you. So again, if you're interested, visit us at book.mubutv.com for your 15-minute discovery call.
Yeah. I can totally see why. You know, Todd, I want to just shift gears slightly here. I think it's fair to say, after reading the book, that you have had a very turbulent journey with the concept of home. And now that the Caverns, I think, you know, represent a home for both you and the visitors that come there, how do you foster a sense of belonging in your events? And on a more personal level, what does home mean to you now?
Yes, there is a through line about home in the book and in my life and in everybody's lives. And to me, home is that space or that place, wherever it is, where you're supposed to be, who you're supposed to be doing it with, doing what you're supposed to be doing. That is the mindset of home to me. And it's so wonderful that we have found a home in Grundy County. And one of the coolest things about the Caverns, I'm going to quote you a statistic, but then I'm going to tell you what I believe is the coolest thing about what we do, and it relates to home. 73% of all of the patrons for the Caverns year over year come from outside the state of Tennessee. And it's a mind-blowing statistic. So there is no music venue that has that high of a percentage of patrons come from outside the state in which it resides, right? Maybe now the Sphere because it's in Vegas, but certainly, you know, no other music venue like Red Rocks, I've talked to those folks, it's like 20%. And so people see this magic cave in Tennessee, in Grundy County, Tennessee, and they make a pilgrimage, a voyage to come and see it. And when they get there, and this is one of the coolest things that ties into your question about home, when they get there, they're met by a family and the family vibe. And so when you look at the TripAdvisor reports or Google reviews, it's so heartwarming to me because you will see that invariably, almost every review, yes, they're saying I saw a magic show in a cave and I took a tour in a cave, or I went to the amphitheater, or I stayed in a yurt, or I went to a festival, or I was at the campgrounds. But what they really seem to just be awash in is a family feeling based on an encounter that they had with a house person or a security person or a parking lot person or just anybody that works at the Caverns. And that is a testament to the culture that we have. And that culture is fundamentally because we're not in a city. Like our security team is not like a bunch of nothing. There's something wrong with this, but you know, at a lot of venues, they just have rental security people and rental concessions people, you know, people that do that for a living that come in and do it. We do it all ourselves. Not only do we book it all ourselves and promote all our shows ourselves, all the people that work there are local people around from Grundy County, Tennessee. And I think it's an amazing thing particularly during these times that we live in, because I'd say half of our crew are sort of city mice, that are from the greater Nashville area. And then the other half are country mice. And so, over these last, since 2017, 16, we all work together. And it's so evident to the patrons that come that it's a family vibe, that it's a family atmosphere. People are just super friendly. And so, for somebody that sort of struggled to find home, literally, metaphorically, to be home and have arrived at home and to have built a home and to, have this home be celebrated and shared with all these people from all over the country and even the world. Wow. What a blessing.
Yeah. And, sticking with that through line, you describe music as communal and even communion. How do you translate this belief into the events that you host at the Caverns? And what role do you think music plays in connecting people beyond language and cultural boundaries?
Well, the thing is, every show at the Caverns is a spiritual experience, whether the patron knows it or not. And of course, they do. And they can define that any way they want, by the way. For some, it's an overtly religious experience. For others, it's just, I just believe that there's nothing, more fundamental to humanity from a visceral or emotional standpoint than music. And music, makes you feel. And yes, it can make you think, but it makes you feel primarily. And so when people come to the Caverns, they're doing something that's so deeply embedded in their DNA as human beings. Scientists and different people have postulated, I guess is the word, opined that the first art that we know of was in caves, right? The caves in France and all over the world. And we're talking going back 40, 50, 60,000 years ago. And so, the first human beings, Neanderthals, whatever they were, hominids, Homo sapiens, that decided to express themselves and like, what are we doing here? What is this about? Like, the first spirituality, the first religion, the first art, they were all taking place in caves. And we can imagine that they were making music there as well, whether that was with rocks or wood or their own sound of their own voice. And so I think there's something that's a primal, visceral thing when you come and see your favorite band inside of a cave that is magic. And magic to me is where the sum is greater than its parts, right? So 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 anymore. It equals 3 or 4 or whatever. And you see that magic in music. You can see it in life. You can see it in business. But I believe that every show in the Caverns is magic. And, last night we had a comedian there, Jim Brewer. That was a cathartic experience. I had people texting me, God, I just needed to laugh. And it was so cool to be in that cave laughing with other people. Tonight we've got Driving and Crying, one of my favorite bands from my childhood, sold out show. And I guarantee you it's going to be spiritual for me. They're going to play Straight to Hell. I'm probably going to get a tear in my eye. It's going to take me back to different times in my life. And it's just going to be, I'm going to be sharing it with a packed cave full of people on a cold night in a warm cave. And so that communal experience of people together experiencing live music, we all know, and anybody listening to this podcast knows the power of that. And it's you're never more human than when you're with other humans appreciating music. It's there. You're connected to all these people. And so it's even written on the doors when you come into the Caverns, because again, we are in woodland and Cherokee Indian territory. There's these giant wooden magic doors that you come into when you walk into the Caverns. And I had a buddy of mine, Rob Morrow, a great woodworking artist, burn in these doors in Sequoian script. And Sequoia was a Cherokee Indian that invented the Sequoian alphabet. And he's the only person that's ever done that, to my knowledge, in the history of humanity. Most alphabets, they evolve over generations. He was one dude, and he was like, I want my people to read. He invented an alphabet, and it's called the Cherokee script, or the Sequoian script. And so we partnered with the Sequoia Birthplace Museum and the Cherokee Nation to have this phrase translated. And what it says in that script on the doors to the caverns is "Welcome to the Caverns, where the Great Spirit brings all people together through music." And that's what music does. That's what the caverns are about. That is my purpose in life. I found it. I wrote a book about it, and but it's a whole journey. But at the end of the day, that's it. And so the feeling of being able to say and understand, human time, but also geologic time, the caverns ain't going anywhere. And so there will be people 1,000 years from now or 10,000 years from now going into that cave to hear music. And as long as we're still around, and I hope we are, I won't be around to see it, but to know that you had a hand inside of time in, creating or making a place, for people to come together and do that is it's just wonderful.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, in listening to you, Todd, it's fascinating that there's an aspect of what you're saying that I want to ask you about, which is, Tennessee's cultural richness plays a central role, I think, in your story as I'm listening to you. And I guess my question is, how do you believe Tennessee's history of racial and music, convergence has influenced the modern music scene? And how does the Caverns contribute to that legacy?
So when people used to ask me, they say, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, "Well, I was born in the West, schooled in the East, and I live in the middle." And that ain't California, New York, and Kansas. That's Memphis, Knoxville, and Nashville. And that's true. So I was born in West Tennessee in Memphis, home of the blues, birthplace of rock and roll. Somebody said that if music was a religion, then Memphis would be Jerusalem. And Sun Studio would be the Solomon's Temple. I mean, there was Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis and, of course, Carl Perkins and, obviously Elvis Presley. But that's the roots of Memphis. And I'm from Memphis, and I spent 18 years in Memphis. And then East Tennessee, you've got, bluegrass and Nashville, of course, you've got country. So you've got all these original American art forms, country, blues, bluegrass, rock and roll, and they all came out of Tennessee. And so there's something about Tennessee, a lot of it, as you touched on, is based on race. It's the collision of black people and white people together, creating art and taking their, the banjo is an African instrument, and you combine that with the Scots Irish and they come over and they bring their mandolins and fiddles and you got the guitar and next thing you know, it's all coming together. And so Memphis, Tennessee itself is the most musical state in the Union. And I think that's objectively true, but certainly from where I sit, it's true. And the Caverns is sort of the fourth musical-based tourism thing in the state. And so you've got Graceland, obviously in Memphis, and you've got Dollywood in East Tennessee. And then in Nashville, you've got the Ryman Auditorium and the Grand Ole Opry. And so here we are in one of the few distressed counties in Tennessee, Grundy County, with this epic music venue that people are coming from all over the country and the world to visit. So it's a wonderful thing for tourism. It's a wonderful thing for the local economy, but it's also another, I've heard people say that come and they're like, "How long have you just been around?" And I was like, "Oh, like when we just opened in 2018 at the new Caverns." And I was like, "Oh, we just opened." I'm like, "God, I would have thought this would have been here forever." It's like, this is such a Tennessee thing. Like, of course you can come hear music inside, bluegrass music inside of a cave in Tennessee. It feels very Tennessee, And so I think that's about the best way I could answer that question.
Todd, you talked about letting go and allowing divine timing to guide you. In hindsight, how do you differentiate between moments when you felt in control and when you felt destiny was guiding you, especially during pivotal career shifts?
Man, that's the $64,000 question right there, because we all it's like lean in or let go, What's the in AA they have the serenity prayer, grant me the courage to change the things I can change, or the wisdom to know the either lean in or let go. I forget how it goes, but it's basically saying when do I lean in and when do I let go? And it can be very hard for me because there have been so many serendipitous things happen that when I start seeing those things happen, I really, it's hard for me to let go. And then the other part of it is if I believe something needs to happen, I just have the will to just persevere through it. So, my problem used to be that I didn't have the will to maybe persevere through things. Now I might sometimes have too much will to try to make things happen instead of letting go on different things. And so I think that is something that every single human on this earth, on a daily basis, tries to have calibration between those two things. And I certainly do as well. And that's always something that, I think about. And, right now, one of the big future things we're working on, we didn't have, or we don't have infrastructure at the Caverns in terms of water and sewage. And so we just got a grant that the city of Pelham did in Grundy County through the state to provide water and sewage. And so that's going to allow us to take the next step, which is to, if I could, I Dream of Jeannie, blink a Caverns Lodge, it would be full every weekend. And so the next vision for where I think the Caverns is going is not just a weekend destination music venue, but something that people could come to, year round. And there's cabins, and there's a lodge, and there's a restaurant, and there's hiking trails, and there's cave tours. And of course, there's music playing in the cave all the time. And, it's a real, like a destination music resort, right? And so, the people are coming. We just need the infrastructure there and to build that out. So that's something that I'm currently working on. But again, I need to have, and remind myself of that, you do everything at its right time. And sometimes you need to lean into things, and other times you got to let go of things. So I just don't think that ever ends. But, for me or for anybody, but I think it's a real key to life is knowing when to, when to lean in, and knowing, maybe more importantly, when to let go.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that that's very important to remember. And it's that fine balance that, one has that I think one really learns that, and you can't really do that other than through experience. I want to ask you, besides your great book, which I did find very inspiring, throughout your life, what books or films have you seen or read that have been particularly inspiring to you?
Well, the biggest one for me, I'm a Lord of the Rings, J.R. Tolkien geek. And so, C.S. Lewis is another one. Very early in my life, during some challenging times when my dad went to jail and my parents got divorced and all that, I started reading the C.S. Lewis, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And then a year or so later, Tolkien. And it was just something about that sort of those mythic tales that really spoke to me and still do. And so now I'm kind of like a little bit of a Tolkien, not scholar, but I go pretty deep on it, In fact, going over next year, they have this cool thing at Oxford University. It's continuing education, and anybody can do it, You got to pay to do it. But, there's a class they're doing next year for a week, and you live in the dorms like you're a student. You go, and they've got classes on everything, like 50 or 100 different classes, But they've got one on Tolkien and Lewis, and I'm going to do that next summer. And so, that has continued to be an inspiration for me. The last couple of years, I have gotten, since I wrote that book, really deep into Joseph Campbell and just myths, the mythic structure and a mythic life. Those are things that really stand out to me. I do as a salesman. I always loved the movie Glengarry Glen Ross. It's a really great movie.
Great movie, man.
I love David Mamet.
Yeah.
And I was always a big fan of the show Deadwood. And it's an inspiring show to me because tying that into Music City Roots, we sort of built that as like a platform for like the artists that needed a light shown on them. And so that's why there's so many YouTube views of it. Like back in 2011, 12, 13, 14, we were doing these beautiful, high definition live streams with great sound. Essentially, we were creating amazing EPKs for like 4 to 5 artists a week and doing it, 50 weeks a year. And so it was giving the artists something they could share with booking agents and, with their fans. And it was kind of like we were in the Wild West. And we called our company Hang Dai Media, which Hang Dai was the thing from Deadwood that Al Swearingen would say to the Chinese guy, Wu. But there was I kind of like a Western, and I feel a lot of times like, a little bit of things are in the Wild West, because whether it's in the Cave or Music City Roots or some of the other projects we do, we're just kind of a little bit of that cowboy nature. We're kind of making our own trails. We're not really we're not following anybody else's way. We're just kind of like, all right, let's do this, then let's do it. And so I guess I could probably go on and on about books and movies and TV shows, but there's a few that come to mind. Those are the big ones that come to mind just in the moment.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines in Glenn Ross is "always be closing." Oh man, when that scene when he comes in there, it's just unbelievable. It's one of the greatest scenes ever on film.
Put that coffee down.
Exactly, exactly.
Jack Lemmon looks up at him
right,
like, what?
Right.
Hell? Yeah.
Yeah, great film. Todd, throughout your journey, you've faced setbacks, profound loss, scams, failure, and even scandal. What advice do you have for others, particularly our listeners, who are navigating similar challenges in their own musical journey?
Okay. The three things that I've noticed that you have to do to be successful in life occurred to me a while back. And so it's kind of the way I live my life. And this is what I preach to my kids. And everybody that comes to work at the Caverns, by the time they come and meet with me, they're already hired. They don't know it, but they've already been hired, but this is kind of the last step. And I give the little speech or whatever, but it just occurred to me contemplating this, that if you do these three things, you're just pretty much guaranteed to be successful in whatever you're doing. And that goes for music as well. But it's be cool, try hard, and grow. And, it doesn't mean be the smartest or the funniest or the best, because that's not usually, be cool means have a positive attitude, I guess, try hard, have a work ethic, put the work into it, and then just be on a path of growth. Get better every day. It's like a lot of people think that you just go from, 0 to 60, or you go from here to there. It's like, as long as you're not going backwards, some days it might be a little tiny baby step you take. Some days it might be Simon Says, take a big step, whatever. But you look through time over years and years and years. And if you're just positive and you try hard and you're just trying to get better, I mean, that's when providence, or luck or synchronicity or whatever you want to say, coincidence, that's when those things shine on you. And the other thing I'll say is, and it's really was the key for me, and it still is just be selfless as you can. In other words, love. Try to return, non-love with love. That's part of being positive. We all have setbacks. We all have people that, God knows, I write about a lot of the people and bosses I had. One of them he's like a literal blue meanie, and another I compared to a cave troll. But I've had people that were over me at every level of life and had control or power over me, that exercised or used that control in ways that were extremely negative to me. But guess what? In almost every one of those instances, something positive came out of it, to the point now that when I have something negative happen, I honestly just laugh and embrace it as because I know it's meant to be, and there's something that's really good going to come out of it. And so I think that's part of that positive attitude, is having a sense of understanding that, just don't be a victim. Like, just, things can happen to you. Sometimes they're through bad choices you make. Let them go. Sometimes it's through shit you didn't even, you didn't cause it. Somebody did it to you. Let it go, and move on with that positivity, and it'll pay off. And I only really realized that just by looking back and reflecting. And that's why writing that book was really cathartic and wonderful for me, because it actually helped put into perspective for me during a very dark time in my life, those sort of themes and elements. And what it actually did was built a bridge to our future. So while I was writing that book, we built an amphitheater so that we could continue to do shows during COVID that were like pod-based deal. And it really kind of changed the music business. We were the first, it wasn't Live Nation or AEG that started doing that. It was this cave in Grundy County, Tennessee, that had 4 nights of Jason Isbell in October of 2020. And nobody in the whole country was doing live music at that point in time. Nobody. There were some people doing some drive-ins, and that was it. But this was an actual concert, and we literally built an amphitheater in like 8 weeks. and move 500 truckloads of dirt. And there's a whole story to that. Well, I don't know. It was during the writing of the book and then we also opened up a whole nother cave, which is the show cave aspect. So, it's just interesting how if you contemplate your life and try to just look at negative experiences and extract the positive out of them, it's there. The light emerges out of the shadows. And I know, the light out of the cave, you go through the cave and, there's a Joseph Campbell line that, the cave you fear often holds the treasure you seek. And that was literal in my life, but it's metaphorically for everybody. Every one of your listeners, has fear, has doubt, has negative things that happen to them or negative things they do. But if you really, embrace that fear, lean into that literally and metaphorically, I bet you'll find that you'll find your own treasure. And because that's something that's why it's part of these myths across all these cultures, because it's true. And it's ancient wisdom, it's modern wisdom. And, it ain't nothing I thought up. It's just something I've lived like everybody else. But, that would be my advice.
It's quite beautiful and it's quite profound, and we are the richer for it. And we're very, very grateful to you. One final question that we have: how can people best reach you and the Caverns? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, just go to thecaverns.com. You can look at shows coming up, make the pilgrimage, come out and see us. You can stay in one of the yurts. We've got Yurt Village, and they've got beautiful yurts with comfortable beds and air conditioning and heating and hot showers and flushable toilets. It's not really glamping. It's just like a beautiful hotel room. And then we've also, got music festivals that we do, Cave Jam, Cave Fest. We do about 100 shows a year. So pretty much every weekend there'll be a show across all genres of music, whether it's EDM or country or rock and roll or Americana, or blues, jam bands, whatever. We do it all, comedy. And come down and take a trip. Come see us, and we'd love to have you be part of the family. If you want to get the book, you can go on to Amazon. There's an Audible one that I read, or you can purchase a copy while you're at the cave or on Amazon or whatever, wherever books are sold.
Wonderful. Todd, we cannot thank you enough for taking the time for doing this and for sharing your journey with us. It's been a wonderfully, incredibly inspiring experience, and we're both very, very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rich, Eric, thank you guys so much. It's a pleasure spending some time with y'all.
What a journey.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. I mean, man, so many things to talk about here, Eric. I mean, This is, on the personal and the professional. I mean, yes, this is a music business podcast, and yes, he has one of the most unique venues in the world, but the journey of how he got there.
Right.
Wow. I loved when he talked about the whole concept of fear. And, Jimmy Iovine I remember Jimmy Iovine in the documentary, The Defiant Ones, talked about, he said, you must never let fear be a headwind. Always make it a tailwind.
Right.
Always make it something that moves you forward. And how Todd talked about that, how he talked about, the whole element of not allowing fear to stop him.
Right.
Because this wasn't like something that, he had a lot of experience. He had any experience. And that's what made this, so fascinating. The themes of overcoming fear and doubt, I think, are universal. I think everyone listening to this can relate to that. And even incredibly successful people. I mean, you and I have known some incredibly successful people in our lives. And it doesn't mean that they are not terribly insecure in other ways.
Right.
And that's the part that I found so, I guess...
Especially in our business.
Yeah, especially in our business, where you can have immense talent, be world-renowned, have lots and lots of money, but still have areas where you are just, so crippled
insecure.
with fear.
Yes.
Yes. And it's very true. And I think what he did is he highlighted the human experience that artists can draw from in that. That's the aspect that I thought was so unique about his own journey with regards to the Cavern and developing it, and what it took for him to break through that.
Right.
And what the specific things were in his own life.
Yeah.
Fatherhood and marriage and the losses.
Death.
The death, exactly, that he spoke about.
Yeah, I also thought, one of the things that inspired me about this story was his take on loss and risk taking, which is his, frequent experiences of loss and change have made him resilient, instilling a mindset where he's less afraid of change and more open to taking risk. And you were talking about that. And I think, interestingly enough, I've noticed, at least with people that I follow, that I admire, that maybe stepped into businesses like Todd, that wasn't really a music business guy and just kind of had a vision about something and came into it and had tremendous success with it. I think a lot of times people that are in spaces that they don't necessarily belong to, that they weren't part of, not that means anything, but they just didn't have any part of, they come into it and they just have tremendous success because I guess they're coming in with a fresh pair of eyes, a vision, and it's just very interesting to see. I think, one of the people that I love that we've referenced on the show before is Richard Branson, and I've always admired him because he's gone into different areas. His area was always music initially when he started Virgin, but then he went into airlines and, all these different areas that he's gone into. And so it takes somebody like that, that's, a visionary with a fresh pair of eyes that can come into an industry and disrupt it. And I'm not saying that Todd Mayo was a disruptor. He just kind of came into a space because of his overwhelming love for this cave. And he just had a vision. It was almost like this epiphany that just came through him. So I thought that was very interesting.
Absolutely, Eric. I could not agree with you more. It's a fascinating point. Rick Rubin speaks about that. He's in the documentary Shangri-La. He speaks about what you were just talking about and referencing, which is it's almost like what you would call a beginner's naivete.
Yes,
I had the same thing with my music business registry. When I started it, I didn't know anything about it. I just knew that I wanted that beautiful, shiny color book with all the ads.
So you came into it naive, not knowing.
Completely naive. So I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
And it's like gumption.
Yes.
You don't know what you don't know. And that's, I think, what helped make, it's like if you knew everything it was going to take and you knew that it was going to be 10 years, would you have even started?
Exactly.
No. So that's the part that I think helps. It's that.
That's the part that gets you through, that gets you to the next station.
Absolutely.
It gets you to that next station.
Another aspect that I thought was so interesting that we haven't touched upon yet is the cultural richness of Tennessee. Tennessee, with Memphis and with Nashville, historically has such a rich musical heritage to it, with country music, with bluegrass music, with so many different types. And today, Nashville has so much diversity in music today, with gospel and so many different types. That's what I thought was fascinating. It integrates a lot of Tennessee's rich musical heritage, and it adds a depth and an authenticity, I think, to a lot of the music that's down there, especially in the environment that he's performing. And that's just something I wanted to touch on, because I think, it's putting the cavern in its
element,
and it's literally in its geographic place.
Yeah, and I also thought this is another big one for me, which was connecting through music, which is obviously the reason why I personally got into my journey with becoming a musician, and because I believe that music is the ultimate. It's over religion, politics, over any medium on the face of the planet. It's the one that can unite everybody together, for better or for worse. And, I thought, music, what he talked about, music's power as a communal and spiritual experience is undeniable. Every show at the Caverns feels magical and emotionally charged. So I can only imagine, just going into an element like that. I've been in caves before, but I can't imagine, because I haven't been to the Caverns, which I'm hoping to go when we go visit Nashville, that, that whole, there's a coolness. Have you ever been inside of a cave?
I have, in Hawaii.
Okay, yeah. So I've been in several caves, and there's that feeling of like, there's like a coldness in there because you're in that kind of dark kind of thing, and there's like a cool air that runs through it.
Yeah.
So just as he was talking through the interview, I was just thinking about that idea of being inside there, but having the element of music, because usually you're hearing water dropping or you're just hearing the air that's flowing through the cave, and just to have the idea of that there's actual music coming through there, and what it took to build that infrastructure and what they're still doing to it and growing every day. So I just thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, I did too. And ultimately, Eric, this is not only about a venue, but this was a conversation about, his life's journey and where he started, what he went through and what he lost, and what motivated him. It was very, very human. And I thought that's the beauty of this, is that, you never know where life's going to take you. And as long as you're committed to staying on the road, which he has been, he's created, one of the most beautiful and contributed so much beauty and music to the world. You can't ask for more than that.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.